If you came here to understand how Rome didn't just defeat cities, but methodically unmade them, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because this isn't a story about swords clashing or soldiers storming gates in a blaze of glory. This is about what happened before that. The part most people never picture. The part where the outcome of a siege was quietly decided by wood, rope, iron, patience, and minds trained to see a wall not as protection, but as a solvable problem. Imagine a fortified city just before sunrise. The air is cool. The streets are empty. Heavy gates remain shut from the night. Guards lean lazily on stone battlements that have stood for generations. Inside, life is ordinary. Families wake up expecting another familiar day behind walls that have always kept danger at a distance. Then the sky begins to change. At first, it's subtle. A distant impact, dull and confusing. Then another. People pause. Guards peer outward. And then they see it. Dark shapes lifting into the air beyond the walls, rising slowly before curving back down toward the city. A crash explodes somewhere inside. Stone slams into stone. Dust erupts. Shouting begins. Another impact follows. And another. The air itself feels hostile now. The people inside don't understand what's happening. The Romans outside understand perfectly, because this is not chaos. This is design. This is engineering applied to fear. A calculated message delivered through gravity, tension, timber, and mathematics. Rome did not dominate the Mediterranean world simply because its soldiers were disciplined. It dominated because it brought something far more terrifying to warfare, a system for dismantling resistance without rushing into it. When Rome wanted a city to fall, it didn't always charge. Sometimes it stopped, observed, measured, built, and then it let the machines do the work. For most ancient civilizations, walls were the ultimate answer. Thick stone ramparts, iron-reinforced gates, towers for archers, moats carved into earth. Walls meant survival. They allowed cities to outlast raiders, intimidate rivals, and create a sense of permanence. But to Rome, a wall was never an ending. It was the beginning of a problem to be solved. Roman commanders understood something many others did not. Patience could be deadlier than aggression. When a Roman army arrived outside a city, it did not just bring shields and swords. It brought carpenters, engineers, surveyors, rope makers, metal workers, and logisticians. Construction was not secondary to war. It was part of the weapon. Even the Roman camp that sprang up outside the walls was a display of precision. Trenches dug in exact lines. Earthworks raised with speed. Watchtowers placed deliberately. Gates aligned. Before the siege engines even appeared, the Romans were already reshaping the battlefield into something they controlled. And then the machines began to rise. They did not shout. They did not rush. They simply appeared, piece by piece, day after day, until the defenders realized they were watching the future of their own defeat being assembled in front of them. One of the most feared of these devices was the ballista. From afar, it resembled an enormous crossbow, but that comparison barely captures its power. Twisted bundles of rope or sinew held tremendous tension. When released, that tension became force, launching long bolts or heavy projectiles at terrifying speed. These were not arrows meant to wound. These were rigid spears of destruction designed to punch through shields, armor, barricades, and sometimes even doors. But what truly made the ballista frightening was not just its power. It was its accuracy. This was not wild bombardment. A trained Roman crew could aim deliberately at a section of wall, a tower, a gate, or a group of defenders. Imagine standing on a battlement and seeing one of these engines slowly turn toward you as if selecting a target with calm focus. The realization would come quickly. Standing in the open meant becoming part of a calculation. The ballista changed how defenders used their own walls. They ducked, they hid, they avoided open positions. And when defenders cannot safely stand on their defenses, those defenses start losing their purpose. Alongside the ballista stood its smaller, faster cousin, the Scorpion. Lighter, more mobile, and capable of rapid firing, the Scorpion was built for precision and speed. Its name captured its nature perfectly. It did not charge, it waited. And then it struck with sudden accuracy. Positioned on platforms or behind Roman lines, the Scorpion kept defenders pinned down. It wasn't always meant to tear apart stone. It was meant to erode confidence. And in a siege, confidence is as critical as food. A city does not collapse the moment a wall cracks. It collapses when the people inside begin to believe that the wall is no longer enough. Then came the onager, a stone-throwing engine that felt almost primitive in its violence. Named after the powerful kick of a wild donkey, it launched heavy rocks in wide arcs with a violent snap. These stones did not strike gently. They smashed into walls, shattered towers, and crashed through rooftops inside the city. That detail is important. The attack was no longer just against the fortifications. It was against the city itself. People could be standing safely behind their walls and still hear the thunderous crash of stone destroying homes behind them. Nowhere felt safe. The walls were not the only targets. The city was being invaded by physics. And each impact carried the same message: your shelter is no longer shelter. But perhaps the most visually terrifying machine was the siege tower. This was not thrown or fired. It moved. A towering wooden structure on wheels, often built as tall or taller than the city walls, reinforced with beams and covered in damp hides to resist fire. Inside were ladders, platforms, and compartments for soldiers. As it rolled forward, it created a slow, unavoidable presence. From its top, Roman archers and bolt throwers fired downward onto defenders. Walls were meant to give defenders height advantage. The siege tower erased that advantage completely. Now the defenders were exposed on a narrow ledge, facing enemies positioned above them. Day after day, the tower crept closer. You could see it, measure its progress. Try desperately to stop it with fire, arrows, stones. But the Romans had planned for all of that. They brought protective screens, counterfire, and relentless determination. Slow, loud, certain. And when the tower reached the wall, bridges dropped and Roman soldiers poured onto the battlements. The wall, once a symbol of safety, became a tight corridor of panic. Still, not every city fell to towers and projectiles. Some walls were too thick, some terrain too awkward, some defenders too stubborn. So Rome turned to the ground itself. Mining was one of the most unsettling Roman techniques. Engineers dug tunnels beneath the city walls, supporting them with wooden beams. The goal was to hollow out the foundation so that the stone above could no longer support its own weight. At the right moment, the supports were burned or removed. The tunnel collapsed, and the wall above it simply fell. Not cracked, not weakened, gone. Defenders often tried to counter this by digging their own tunnels, listening through the earth for Roman activity. Underground, in cramped darkness and heat, two groups of men might work toward each other separated by only soil. When tunnels met, brutal fighting could erupt in complete darkness. Even when they didn't meet, the stress was immense. The ground beneath the city, once a symbol of stability, had become uncertain. The Romans were attacking not just the walls, but the idea that the city stood on solid ground. Then there was the battering ram, brutally simple. A massive beam, often iron-tipped, suspended in a protective frame. It swung repeatedly against gates or weak points. Defenders tried everything: dropping stones, pouring liquids, attempting to hook or trap the ram. But the rhythm continued, again and again and again. It wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, dreadful countdown. A steady reminder that every structure has a breaking point, and Rome had the patience to find it. And while all of this happened outside, something equally destructive unfolded inside. Time became an enemy. Food dwindled. Water grew scarce. Disease threatened. Arguments erupted. Some citizens demanded negotiation. Others demanded resistance. The siege turned the city inward against itself. Roman commanders often encouraged this by completely surrounding the city, cutting off trade and escape. In some cases, they built their own walls around the city, sealing it into a prison of earth and timber. Rome did not always need to break the walls. Sometimes it simply waited for the people behind them to break first. What made all of this so terrifying was that it was repeatable. These were not random inventions. Rome standardized designs, trained specialists, and carried knowledge from campaign to campaign. Timber could be gathered locally. Iron fittings transported. Crews knew their roles. Siege engines could be raised far faster than defenders expected. A city might believe it had months before serious equipment appeared. Instead, within days, machines began rising from the earth like manufactured beasts. This wasn't a raid. This wasn't temporary. This was Rome methodically constructing the future of the city's collapse, and the stories traveled. Survivors described the sky raining stone, the endless pounding of the ram, the slow advance of towers, the unsettling knowledge of tunnels beneath their homes. By the time Rome approached another city, fear often arrived before the legions did. Rome had turned expectation into a weapon. These siege weapons reflected Roman values: discipline, precision, adaptability, and patience. Rome absorbed ideas from other cultures, improved them, and integrated them into a system. Every siege was a lesson, every success a template. But behind all of it were ordinary people inside those cities' families, craftsmen, children suddenly trapped inside a calculated process of destruction. A siege was not a battle between armies. It was an entire community caught inside the machinery of war. And because Roman siege methods were so effective, cities across the ancient world changed how they built. Thicker walls, angled defenses, deeper moats. Designs meant to resist towers and projectiles. An architectural arms race was born from fear of Roman engineering. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that engineering itself is neutral. The same knowledge that builds aqueducts and temples can build machines that tear them down. Roman siege engines were organized destruction created by rational minds. A wall feels permanent, but Rome proved permanence is often an illusion. With the right tools, the right plan, and enough time, even stone can be persuaded to fall. So when you hear about Roman engineering, don't just imagine aqueducts stretching across valleys. Picture the other side of that brilliance: siege towers rolling forward, stones crashing through rooftops, bolts striking with precision, tunnels hollowing out the earth beneath proud walls. Because Rome didn't just build an empire, it built the tools to erase resistance, and it left behind a chilling reminder that the most powerful weapon is not always the sword. Sometimes it is the mind that designs the machine. If you enjoyed this journey into the brutal engineering of Roman siege warfare, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more stories from the ancient world, and share in the comments which Roman invention you found most terrifying.